Well, hello and welcome to the CBN News Live Desk. And we're taking a look today at this horrible scene that played out in Colorado over the weekend where Jews were attacked, most of them elderly Jews, including an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor, attacked by a man who is an Egyptian national who was in the country illegally after overstaying his visa and clearly had a massive hatred and disdain for Jews and anyone who supports Israel. And joining me today to talk about this and more, Pastor Mark Hitchcock from endtimes.com. Pastor Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, just a horrible scene that played out there in Boulder, Colorado. And the level of hatred, Pastor, is, I mean, something when you see, even just in some of these pictures, obviously, let alone the actions he took, making basically making makeshift Molotov cocktails and flamethrowers and trying to burn these victims. And again, elderly, including a Holocaust survivor. The fact that somebody who went through the Holocaust and then has to be in a place like America, supposedly a safe and peaceful place, and then to have to be subjected to this, it really boggles the mind. But we're really seeing this, Pastor Mark, this increase in anti-Semitism and this hatred towards the Jewish people over the past, especially over the past year or so.
Well, there's no doubt about it. It's ramped up, since the October 7th attack, of Hamas against Israel. You would think that there would have been an outpouring of sympathy for Israel, but it's actually now gone into reverse, where there's this outpouring of support for Palestinians and even for Hamas. But you're right. This Egyptian man was here illegally in our country. It makes you wonder, are there sleeper cells in our country, terrorist sleeper cells, or a lone wolf like this man? Maybe we're sent here for this express purpose. That's something that's certainly possible. But he'd been planning this for over a year. And when it was over with, he had no regret. He said he'd do it again if he was let out. So there's no remorse, no regret. It's just an all-out hatred for the Jewish people. And these are just, these are elderly people that just meet there every week and kind of have a demonstration. It's peaceful. They're in Boulder. Just what they're basically trying to do is just remind people and just kind of give this, a reminder that there's still hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. So that's really the whole purpose of this. And, he comes there, of course, with this, makeshift flamethrower and Molotov cocktails to try to kill them. So, it's gone from basically, burning the Israeli flag now to burning Jewish people is where we've come to. And it's erupting all over the world. There was an imam in Australia who's made some terrible comments about the Jewish people, about Israel. He'd kind of apologized for that. He came out with even stronger comments here recently. In Paris, a synagogue over there was painted with green paint. We see this happening globally all over the world, and it's mushrooming. It's increasing. But it's a reminder of us, I think, as we study the Bible, we look kind of to the end times, that this world really, this age during the tribulation period before the return of Jesus to the earth, is going to really have a crescendo of anti-Semitism that's predicted in Scripture. And so, what we see happening all over the world now are just really faint foreshadows of what's coming in the future on a much greater scale.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And you mentioned, and we talked about this sort of, you can see the hatred, and it's not hard to understand how things like this happen when you see the narratives that are in higher institutions across the country. They're allowing these protests to go on and supporting Hamas and unconscionable support of terrorists who have attacked Israel, like we saw on October 7th, as you mentioned. And you see that hatred play out in someone like this. And like, this isn't some, like you said, spur of the moment incident. This wasn't from an altercation and they have a disagreement on something. This was clearly planned. And honestly, it's eerily reminiscent of, again, I think last time we talked, I mentioned being down at the Gaza border watching the Hamas terrorists trying to break through the border fence at that time. And they were sending over these like floating devices that were essentially like Molotov cocktails. And then they'd they'd send them over and they'd float in, and they were trying to set Israeli farms and fields on fire, is what they were doing. But it's like, then you see the same exact tactic here, somebody, except just aiming it directly at people this time. And so it's, the point there is, it's not surprising to me. I mean, you're talking about it from the biblical perspective, so we should expect to see it. But then when we see it kind of practically playing out here, the amount of hatred in the media and in higher institutions that there is, and the blame that goes towards Israel, it's not surprising that it manifests with reactions like this.
Well, yeah, at MIT last week in a valedictory address there to the graduates, one of the student there that was speaking, launched into a tirade against Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel tirade, and supporting Palestine, free Palestine. In the wake of October 7th, that October 7th attack, 1,200 Jews were killed. 251 were taken hostage. You'd think there'd be the outpouring of the world for Israel. But it's actually been in reverse, and it's shocking. Israel is the one who's being accused of genocide, but it's actually Hamas that wants genocide. Genocide is basically kind of, you're calling for or carrying out the physical destruction of a group based on ethnicity or religion or nationality. That's not what Israel is doing, but that's what Hamas wants to do. When they say free Palestine, from the river to the sea, they want the Jewish people in Israel to be wiped out and to be destroyed. That's genocide. What Israel's doing is responding to an attack against them. So everything, it's good's called evil, evil's called good. Everything's upside down. But that's what we should expect, because Satan's the god of this world. He's the ultimate anti-Semite. He hates the Jewish people because God has made promises to them. He hates what God loves, and so we should expect this to be very chaotic and really not make any sense. But ultimately, if we know the Bible, it does, because the Bible tells us this is where the world's going to end up ultimately in the end times.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of this global movement, this anti-Semitism that's rising, so many times, Pastor Mark, we see Israel blamed for things. We see Israel sort of maligned when it comes to this conflict, like you were saying, like somehow against all logic after October 7th, people seem to, it took like a week of sympathy, maybe even less, before they started chanting from the river to the sea and blaming Israel for their response, et cetera, et cetera. The latest version of that is here in this claim that somehow the IDF had just opened fire on hungry Palestinians, hungry Gazans, I think was the headline that I saw in one outlet. And that claim has been strongly rebuked by the IDF, by Israel. And this is just another example, Pastor Mark, of the world sort of really pushing untruths to try to malign Israel and to get people to go against Israel, to get people to fight Israel. But this claim that the IDF did it, and then they have this video of these kind of gunmen here who clearly aren't in any sort of uniform, that did some of this shooting. And yet this claim, the damage is done now because everybody thinks that Israel has now shot just hungry Gazans just for trying to get food.
Well, you're right. It's misinformation, disinformation that's put out there. And as you said, once it's out there, people never hear the rebuttal to it. They never hear when it's been, when it's been destroyed, when this narrative has been destroyed. And so, but people in our world today, the majority of people, and certainly in other places, are eager to hear anything that's against Israel. So they will accept it with little or no proof. But it's all this way. The members of Hamas, they're in hospitals, they're in schools, they're firing rockets from these places. They don't care about their own people. And then whenever Israel retaliates, then there's an uproar about civilians being killed. And look, it's a terrible thing. No one wants civilians to be killed in any conflict. But it's all misinformation, disinformation about food being brought in there, humanitarian aid. Israel knows when humanitarian aid is brought in there, it's immediately seized by Hamas. They use it, they sell it, they make money from it. They're not distributing it to the people. They don't love their own people enough to help them. So it's all kinds of disinformation. So you don't know when you hear information from there whether it's true, whether it's not true, what to make of it. my natural inclination now is when I hear things from there is to not believe them, until they're, completely
Right.
proven, verified, confirmed. I don't believe them, and because we've been lied to so many times about all these things that are happening. But again, people are eager to believe it, though. People are eager to believe anything that's negative, that's bad, against Israel and the Palestinians. I mean, Hamas knows that. They play to that, and they put out all kinds of disinformation and know that once it's out there, the genie can't be put back in the bottle again.
Yeah, and look, obviously, there's critics that will say, "Oh, well, nobody can criticize Israel. It's like they can't do any wrong." And I don't think that's. I feel like that's sort of a straw man argument, because I feel like even supporters of Israel are going to criticize them when they do things wrong. And I think the difference here to what you're saying, like when the Gaza Health Ministry puts out a number, this is an organization that is part of a group that has a vested interest. Their goal is to eliminate Israel. That's what they want to do. They want to kill Jews. They are not shy about admitting this. So you have to take that, and they're terrorists. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, the information that they're putting out there. Now, Israel, on the other hand, while again, they're not perfect, they're going to make mistakes. But if you remember, there were times where they had operations when they were trying to go into Gaza where civilians were killed, and they had people fired over this. Generals were, either demoted or lost their job over a couple of incidents after they gave an inquiry. So to me, when I look at that, it says, okay, Israel is willing to admit when they make a mistake. They are willing to say, like, so you can't just look at their investigation and say, oh, well, the IDF investigated it and said they found X, Y, and Z. So that's just propaganda from them. Well, there's evidence, and there is historical precedence here in recent history where Israel has admitted mistakes. They have taken action against people who have made mistakes. And they clearly have taken extra measures to not kill civilians, but this is war, and that happens, unfortunately. Whereas you do not see the same on the Gaza side of the aisle. You do not see them saying, you know what, we were wrong about 30,000 babies dying overnight. Well, we kind of fudged the numbers on that. We thought it's actually 2, and there was 30,000, a little bit of a mathematical error there. You don't see any sort of repentance or admission of a mistake. So to me, when you're looking at these two things, I'm with you, Pastor Mark. You've got to immediately not trust the information coming out from Gaza, but wait and see where things land instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to be used as a pawn here for one side or the other.
Well, that's right. You're correct. When has Hamas ever fired one of their leaders for killing civilians?
Right. No,
they're rewarded.
They're rewarded. Yes.
They're rewarded for killing civilians. Yes. And there's never an investigation that takes place after, some incident of what happened here where innocent people killed. I mean, October 7th, the whole point of that was to go kill civilians,
right?
To kill civilians and take civilians hostage. That was the whole point of that. And this war is unlike any other. It's urban. It's in a small area, and there's just 25 miles of coastline, just 5 to 7 miles wide. The Gaza Strip. It's a small area. They're firing these rockets into Israel out of all kinds of crowded areas. So Israel is in a terrible position in this. They really are, because you've got to stop people from shooting and killing your people. But in doing that, there's going to be a lot of tragic collateral damage in that. And I believe that the leaders in Israel don't like that. They'll let people know a lot of times ahead of time they're going to hit an area so that people can get out of there. So they give forewarning about it, which is militarily is not a smart thing to do. But it's these situations, they're a mess. They're terrible. But the problem is for Hamas that they lie. They're deceivers. They're giving out any kind of misinformation. They're desperate now, obviously. They're trying to turn the world more and more against Israel. They know the longer this lasts, the more they can cry genocide and all of that. The further this is going to go. Right now, Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, they have a boat that's on its way to Israel right now to try to challenge Israel's blockade of Gaza. There's 11 of these activists that are on there, actors and activists that are there, and they're Greta Thunberg, who was big in climate activism. She last year has a statement of she wanted to crush Zionism, And so, this is kind of the cause du jour. This is the cause that everybody's becoming a part of, and it's everywhere. And as more and more people like this kind of grab onto this and begin to keep saying this mantra over and over again, it's penetrating the hearts of just regular people who are believing what's happening, what's being said about all of this. And so, really, one of the things about this, though, too, I think is very important to remember, is that there's the new anti-Semitism. There's different language that's being used. They're never saying they hate Jews or they hate Israel. Now, Hamas will say that, but
Right.
others will say they're against Zionism.
Yeah.
They're anti-Zionist, crush Zionism. Well, all Zionism is just a belief that the Jewish people have a right to their homeland. So Zionism is just kind of a way to dress up a little bit this idea of anti-Semitism. People are only so brazen and bold to say that they hate Jews, so they use this new anti-Semitism. It's an anti-Zionism that they use to hate the Jewish people and want them destroyed and driven out of their land.
Just putting lipstick on a pig, essentially. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then, of course, and so what can we expect, just real quick on this before we move on to Ukraine and Russia? But so you're from the prophetic lenses, we're looking at all this anti-Semitism. We've been talking about these instances that have been more and more, it seems, that will continue, right? From the prophetic lens, you see that that's going to continue to grow. What can we expect to see on that front?
Well, I think the Bible says, I believe, that someday this Antichrist will arise, this global world figure, and he's going to solve that Middle East peace crisis. It says in Daniel 9:27, he is going to make a firm covenant with the many in the land of Israel for a period of 7 years. Make a 7-year peace treaty or covenant with Israel. He's going to be hailed as the greatest peacemaker of all time, finally solving this, so we can see where this is all headed. I mean, all of this chaos, all the confusion that's over there. A man is going to come, a man with a plan, who's going to bring some order out of this chaos and bring a peace. Now, it's going to be a temporary peace. It's going to be a false peace. It's only going to last for a 3.5-year period, half of that time. And he's going to break that treaty with Israel. And he's going to become the greatest opponent and oppressor of the Jewish people in history, the world's greatest anti-Semite, because he's going to be totally empowered by Satan. And Satan knows that God has promises for the Jewish people to be fulfilled, and he's going to try to wipe them out so that can't take place. So, the greatest anti-Semitism in the world is in the future. But first, there's going to be this false peace. The Antichrist is going to come on the scene like he loves the Jewish people and is their friend, and brings this peace there. But that's where all of this ultimately is headed. And you can just see how our world today is set up for that. People are clamoring and yearning for some kind of solution to this Middle East peace problem that's been going on since the nation of Israel modern state was reconstituted in 1948. But it's ultimately headed for a terrible, terrible time. The tribulation period is called the time of Jacob's trouble, a terrible time of persecution for the Jewish people. But Jesus will come back at the end of that time period to deliver them, to rescue them, and to fulfill his covenants and promises with them during his reign on the earth for 1,000 years.
All right, let's head on over here to what's going on with the latest with Ukraine and Russia, and tell me about this drone attack that happened.
Well, on Sunday, on June the 1st, Ukraine unleashed an assault against Russia that's been planned for 18 months. This is kind of almost like the pagers, that Israel had, with Hezbollah.
Yeah.
This is kind of the same type of attack. What they did is they had 117 drones, these small drones. They're called front personal view drones, FPV drones. They're just a few $100s a piece to make. But these were shipped with, I don't know how they did this, but they're shipped in wooden sheds. And they went to various places in Russia near Russian air bases. And they activated these drones, and in kind of almost a simultaneous attack, hit 5 Russian air bases scattered all over the place. One of them is 2,500 miles from the Russia-Ukraine border. It's how far. They're up in the Arctic area, up in Siberia, one of them. And they did $7 billion worth of damage to Russian planes. And these are a lot of their planes that can carry nuclear payload. They hit some of their planes that are kind of like AWACS. That's kind of, the eyes and ears, of these military attacks that are flying around, letting people know what's happening on the ground. And so It's the most audacious drone attack in military history. Many articles I've read said this has forever altered military strategy because
Right.
now ships and planes and tanks can be taken out by a drone that costs a few $100s. These $1 billion pieces of equipment. And so many are saying this is going to change the trajectory of the war. I think it might change it that Russia now will attack even more vehemently against Ukraine. Medvedev, the former president of Russia, said, we don't want compromise, we want victory. They're calling this the Pearl Harbor for Russia. This surprise attack against them. So there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. But again, we see Russia constantly in the news. Russia, this is called their Pearl Harbor. Well, Russia someday is going to join with Iran and Turkey and some other nations in Ezekiel 38 and 39 and attack Israel in the end times. And that we could call Israel's Pearl Harbor when that will take place. But we just continue to see Russia and their aggression. We keep seeing them in the news. And all this, I think, is ultimately a buildup to this alliance they're going to form in the end that will come against Israel. And I think their attack against Israel in the end times will be an attack against the West as well, the Antichrist, because he'll be in this covenant or treaty with Israel. So we just see the buildup here happening on a lot of different fronts. But this is changing warfare, and you can see how the Antichrist can come along if he's able to get a kind of a monopoly on this technology. What will be next after drones? You can control the world. You can know where everybody is. These drones can penetrate into all kinds of different places. And we can see how someone can control the world by using a lot of this incredible technology that's coming online, such as drones, and who knows what will come after that.
Yeah, and real quick before we go, I wanted to talk, speaking of technology, Pastor Mark, I came across an article about it was AI, and it was just an expert, a tech guy that kind of looks at this stuff, and he had an interesting theory. And I don't think this guy's a Christian, so you can understand where he's coming from on the worldview. But he thinks there's going to be a massive population reduction from, like, I think we're around 8 billion now. He thinks in a couple hundred years, by 2300, it'll be down to just 100 million people. And this guy's name is Subhash Kak, I think, K-A-K. I'm not sure how you say that. He teaches computer science at Oklahoma State University. And he said that, and the reason for this is interesting. He says, essentially, that because AI will just take so many jobs away over time, that birth rates will plunge because people will be hesitant to have kids who are destined to be unemployed, especially given the exorbitant costs of rearing children. So just interesting to me. I mean, what would you make of this? I mean, to me, my first reaction from it from a Christian worldview is like, let's not make decisions in fear here, like trying to manufacture the climate that we're in and say, well, I don't think a kid can make it these days. So, kind of taking away and removing God's providence in our lives and his purpose in our lives. So what's your reaction to that view on AI?
Well, my first reaction would be is I sure hope the Lord comes back before the year 2300. Again, we talk a lot here about, these signs of the times and things we see. And of course, no one knows when Jesus is coming back, but
Right.
Again, Israel, is coming up on the 80th anniversary of the reconstitution of their modern state. That's the super sign of the end times. See all these other things happening. So, my view would be that I believe things are going to wrap up a lot more quickly than 2300. There is coming massive depopulation of this world. There's no doubt about that. That's going to be during the tribulation period. A fourth of the people on earth die in the fourth seal judgment. A third die in the sixth trumpet judgment. So, there are a lot of people out there. It's interesting. A lot of people are predicting, massive depopulation of the world, in the future due to a lot of different things, epidemics, pandemics, AI, all kinds of things. But the Bible tells us that certainly is coming. But that's interesting. Yeah, he's from Oklahoma State University. That's where I went to college, at Oklahoma State. So one of our own here in this area. But
Right.
Those are just a couple of thoughts I have about that.
All right, good stuff. Well, Pastor Mark, appreciate you stopping by here as always each week. Make sure you're checking out endtimes.com. People, if you want to see more of the work that Pastor Evans, Pastor Hitchcock are doing over there, checking out the news of the day, from a prophetic lens, definitely a good stop in your daily rounds. Pastor Mark, appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you, brother.
All right, and thank you all for watching CBN News and the live desk here. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com to check out all the latest news of the day from a Christian perspective. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Quick Start podcast. CBN's beginning to expand our podcast offerings. I host Quick Start, a look at the news in 20 minutes each weekday morning. We'd love to have you there with us each and every weekday. Also, Abigail Robertson has started the Heaven Meets Earth podcast. Really great stories, great testimonies you're going to see in that, and a whole bunch more offerings there. So make sure you're checking that out. Well, God bless you, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time. All righty, sir. Sorry for the late start.